A howling blizzard battered the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, stripping away the warmth from even the bravest souls. Midnight shadows stretched long across the stone arch bridge, painting the world in cold silver and trembling black. Claire Harper stood alone at the very edge, her boots pressed into the snow-packed walkway, the wind gnawing at her exposed cheeks. In her fist, she clutched a battered army dog tag, the name Mike Harper, half worn by years of worry and grief. Claire's breaths came in harsh, icy clouds, each one tighter than the last. The Mississippi River raged below, black, wide, and roaring against the stone. Her eyes, haunted and rimmed with sleeplessness, barely blinked as she stared out over the churning water. She looked like a ghost in a military jacket, caught between memory and oblivion, the only hint of life the dog pressed stubbornly against her hip. Blaze, a young German shepherd, sturdy and sharp-eyed, refused to leave her side. His paws slid on the icy concrete as he pressed his flank into her, whimpering, his eyes wide with worry. He nudged her leg, pawing at her hand as if to anchor her back to the world. His breath puffed warm against her cold skin, the only living thing in that desperate midnight moment. The storm lashed at her, stinging her eyes and forcing her to squint, but she couldn't look away from the darkness. Every muscle in her body was wound tight, her knuckles white around the dog tag. She remembered Mike, her brother, her best friend, from those nights in Afghanistan. His laugh, his courage, and his loss, all echoing inside her with every gust of winter wind. Why was she here? Why this bridge, this night, with only a dog and a memory for company? Blaze, ever persistent, refused to let her go. He barked suddenly, loud and sharp, a note of urgency in the howling emptiness. Claire flinched, her heart lurching. Blaze circled in front of her, blocking her from the edge, his fur bristling, his stare unwavering. For a moment, she teetered on the brink, not just of the bridge, but of herself. The darkness inside threatened to swallow her whole, the cold both outside and within growing too strong. But Blaze's insistent bark snapped through her like a lightning bolt, dragging her from the edge of that endless night. He barked again, this time facing the city lights, tail straight and body tense, as if he sensed something in the storm that Claire could not see. He nosed her hand, then darted a few steps away, barking and looking back at her, urging her to follow. The world shrank to that single thread, his need, his loyalty, his refusal to let her slip away. Claire's legs shook as she stepped back from the rail. Blaze barked again, louder, and she found herself following him, a thin thread of curiosity, or maybe hope, pulling her away from the abyss. She stumbled after him, still gripping the dog tag, the river's roar fading behind her, replaced by the insistent presence of the dog who would not give up. They made their way through the blizzard, snow blinding and thick, Blaze guiding her through the empty city streets, his nose low, his ears pricked for danger. Each step away from the bridge felt like a fight, but Blaze kept glancing back, barking encouragement, never letting her linger in despair. They moved through the storm like survivors washed ashore. The wind howled, the city lights were dim and distant, and Claire's body ached with exhaustion. But she followed Blaze, not knowing where they were going. Only that moving was better than standing still, that following him was better than the void. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the pair reached a small diner, the Blue Spoon, its windows aglow against the storm. The wind slammed the door open as they entered, scattering a blast of snow into the warmth and light. Inside, the heat couldn't quite chase away the tension. A handful of people huddled in booths, the air thick with the smell of coffee and something fried. At the far side of the diner, a nervous girl sat across from a gruff man, her hand trembling as she fidgeted with her napkin. The man's grip on her arm was a shade too tight, his gaze flicking suspiciously around the room. Blaze tensed, his hackles up, and Claire, still reeling from her own battle, felt a new chill settle in her gut. Something was wrong here, something more urgent than her own pain. She watched the girl make a fist and slowly release it, a signal she recognized from another lifetime. The silent SOS, her military instincts snapped awake, adrenaline slicing through her numbness. As the snowstorm raged harder outside, trapping everyone within, Claire understood. This night wasn't about her despair anymore. She was meant to be here. Blaze, ever the soldier, had led her from the edge, not just to save her, but so she could save someone else. And so, in the warmth of the diner, with the storm closing in and her heart still raw, Claire stood a little straighter, her gaze sharp as she prepared to do what she'd always done best: notice, act, and fight for someone who needed her. The Blue Spoon Diner looked like any old roadside refuge: chipped linoleum, a line of battered stools, the faint hum of a jukebox no one had fed in years. But tonight, the atmosphere felt thick, like the whole place was holding its breath. The windows were glazed with frost, trapping everyone inside, cut off from the world by a blizzard that just wouldn't quit. Claire stomped snow from her boots, the heat from inside clawing awkwardly at her frozen cheeks. Blaze shook himself off, his thick fur sending a spray of melting flakes across the checkerboard floor. People glanced over, but only briefly, all except the girl in the corner booth. Her eyes snapped to Blaze, then to Claire, desperate and wide. Claire's gaze settled on her, and she didn't miss the man sitting across from her, mid-40s, heavy-set, wearing a battered wool coat, hand gripping the girl's forearm with a steadiness that was too practiced, too tight. He looked like a man who made a habit of being in control. Blaze's ears flattened, and he gave a low, warning whine. Claire kept her voice even as she approached the counter, signaling to Mrs. Ramirez, the owner, a sturdy woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "Coffee, please," Claire said, keeping her eyes on the pair in the corner. "And maybe a little something for my partner here." Mrs. Ramirez smiled at Blaze. "What a good boy," she whispered, passing him a sausage, and then her eyes flicked to where Claire was looking. Her smile faded, replaced by a subtle tension. She saw it too. In the corner, the man, Walter Briggs, leaned across the table, murmuring something into the girl's ear. She flinched. Claire watched, her own pulse quickening. The girl's name, she'd learn later, was Ava. Ava's fingers tapped the edge of her glass, slow and deliberate. Then, her hand formed a fist, holding it for a count, then releasing. It was the SOS. 3 slow, 3 quick, 3 slow. Claire knew the code, and she recognized the terror in the girl's eyes. She'd seen it on the battlefield, and in the mirror too. Blaze started to whine, scratching at the tile, his gaze locked on Ava, tail down but body poised. Claire took a deep breath, fighting to keep her own panic in check. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. The hum of conversation fading as her senses narrowed. She stood, coffee untouched, and made her way to the end of the counter, closer to the booth. She didn't want to spook Walter, didn't want to push him into something reckless, but she needed to get Ava help. "Excuse me, ma'am," Claire said quietly to Mrs. Ramirez, keeping her voice low. "Can you call the police? Tell them it's urgent. Don't look over there, just do it." Mrs. Ramirez gave the faintest nod and disappeared into the kitchen, her face composed, but her hands shaking. Outside, the snow intensified, turning the diner into an island. No one was coming in or out anytime soon. Claire's mind raced. Backup was going to be slow, maybe too slow. Suddenly, Blaze padded over to Ava, nudging her knee under the table. The movement made Walter scowl. "Get your mutt away from us," he snapped, trying to sound in control, but there was an edge of fear in his voice. Ava reached down, her hand trembling, and rested it on Blaze's head. For a moment, the fear in her face softened. Claire saw it, the tiniest thread of hope. A young busboy, Tyler, watched the scene, his eyes wide. He slipped out his phone and started filming, holding it low by the side of the milkshake machine, capturing everything, just in case. Walter shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. He tried to tug Ava's hand away, but Blaze stayed close, growling softly. "Let go of her," Claire said, stepping forward, her voice steady, eyes cold as steel. "Now." Walter looked up, sizing Claire up, measuring her. He scoffed, forcing a laugh. "Mind your own business. This is family." Claire didn't blink. "She's scared. You're hurting her. I saw her signal. The cops are on their way." He gripped Ava's wrist tighter, his knuckles white. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Claire didn't move. She felt the old training, the old instincts, her body settling, ready for trouble. Blaze stood in front of Ava now, his hackles raised, a low rumble in his throat. For a split second, time stretched. The storm shrieked against the windows, shaking the glass in its frames. The neon sign outside flickered, buzzing like a trapped wasp. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Ava's hand moved, fingers fumbling, and she slid a red candy across the table to Blaze. He sniffed it, then licked her palm. That tiny gesture, a silent thank you, cracked something open in Claire. This girl wasn't just scared. She was brave, reaching out even as she trembled. Mrs. Ramirez returned, voice louder than necessary. "Sheriff's on his way. Nobody leaves till he gets here." She eyed Walter, daring him to argue. He stood, dragging Ava with him, face twisted with anger. "We're leaving!" he snarled. Blaze bristled, planting himself in the aisle, blocking their path. Claire stepped between Walter and the door, her hand unconsciously brushing the dog tag in her pocket. "You're not going anywhere." Walter's face twisted. He shoved Claire aside, trying to bull past her, but Blaze lunged, barking fiercely, fangs bared. Walter staggered back, bumping into a table, eyes wide with sudden panic. Ava jerked her arm free, stumbling behind Blaze. "Help me!" Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Mrs. Ramirez grabbed a heavy skillet from behind the counter, wielding it like a shield. Tyler kept filming, hands shaking. The diner had become a powder keg. The storm outside had nothing on the storm inside. As the sirens wailed faintly in the distance, fighting the blizzard, Claire planted her feet, Blaze at her side, and stared Walter down. She was done running from the darkness. She was ready to fight for the light, even if her hands still trembled. The storm pressed harder against the diner, winds howling and snow swirling so thick that it erased the city beyond the frosted glass. Inside, tension hummed just beneath the clink of plates and the hiss of the coffee machine. Every soul was stranded together in this tiny island of neon and tile, each glance sharper, each word weighed. Blaze settled under Ava's booth, his big body curled protectively around her small feet. He watched Walter, still standing, still trying to look in control, but sweat had begun to bead on Walter's forehead, betraying his unease. Ava sat very still, her breathing shallow, her hand occasionally reaching down to tangle in Blaze's thick fur, drawing silent comfort from his presence. Claire moved to a booth nearby, her back to the wall, eyes scanning the room. She was trained for this, reading body language, listening for the words not spoken. She noticed how Walter kept his coat close, how his eyes flicked to the windows, the exits, the growing storm. She clocked the battered suitcase shoved under the table, duct-taped and old, a runner's bag. Ava's gaze was different now. Every time she looked at Blaze, her eyes grew just a little less desperate. She didn't say a word, but when Claire caught her eye, the girl gave a barely there nod. A pact had been made. Claire felt memories pressing up, old sands and burning skies. Afghanistan, the crackle of radios, and the weight of watching someone else's back. Mike's calm voice. Notice everything, Care. Sometimes a detail saves a life. Blaze had been there too, saving men and women in ways words never could. Mrs. Ramirez, behind the counter, moved with a tension that belied her practiced grace. She checked on the phone, muttered quietly to the dispatcher, and refilled coffee cups with hands that trembled just slightly. She never once took her eyes off Walter. In the corner, Tyler kept his phone low, recording what he could. He whispered to Claire as she passed, "I'm getting all of this, just in case he tries something." She nodded, grateful for the boy's courage, the small, ordinary heroism of noticing, of acting. The storm outside raged louder, but inside there was a hush, everyone watching the unfolding drama. Walter pretended to scroll on his phone, but every few minutes he'd mutter at Ava, "Just sit tight. Your mom will come." He never once let go of the suitcase's handle. Claire shifted, watching for patterns. Walter's knee bounced. Sweat stained his collar. When Mrs. Ramirez walked too close, he flinched. It was the behavior of a man on the edge. She caught Ava's eyes again and smiled, as gentle as she could. She reached into her pocket, and just for a second, let the dog tag catch the light. An unspoken reminder of the courage to endure. Ava, still silent, reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny red candy, then slid it toward Blaze under the table. Blaze sniffed it, then licked her hand, tail thumping softly against the tile. The tiniest smile ghosted across Ava's lips, a flicker of comfort in a world of fear. Tyler, watching, caught the moment. He whispered, "She's braver than she looks." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of that simple truth. Suddenly, Walter grew agitated. He stood abruptly, yanking the suitcase closer. "We're not waiting anymore, we're going." The room tensed. Claire stood too, her voice low and calm. "The police are on their way, sir. The roads are blocked. No one's going anywhere in this weather." Walter glared, lips pressed tight. "You think you know what's going on? She's my niece. I'm taking care of her." But Ava shook her head ever so slightly, her eyes pleading with Claire. Mrs. Ramirez stepped out from behind the counter, armed with a frying pan, her face set, a matriarch defending her kitchen. "Nobody leaves. We all wait for the sheriff. That's the rule in a storm." Walter's hand hovered over the suitcase. For the first time, Claire noticed the numbers written on the tape, a faded address scrawled in a nervous hand. Was he running from someone, or running from himself? Blaze growled, a low sound that vibrated under the table. Ava reached for his collar, and for a moment, it was just a little girl and a big dog, trying to hold on in a world too big for both. Claire crouched by the booth, her voice gentle. "Ava, is there someone I can call for you?" Ava bit her lip, shaking her head, her fingers tight on Blaze's fur. Walter slammed his fist on the table. "You people think you know everything. You don't know what it's like out there. I'm doing what I have to do." The diner grew silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. Mrs. Ramirez, never blinking, quietly dialed the phone again. "Sheriff, you'd better hurry," she whispered. "Things are getting worse." Claire sat back, her heart pounding, watching Walter unravel. She remembered her own unraveling, the nights when the world was too loud, too cruel. Mike's voice echoed in her mind. "Stay steady, Claire. Hold the line. You're stronger than the storm." Ava, silent as snowfall, slid another candy to Blaze. The dog licked her palm again. This time she didn't flinch when Walter barked at her to stop. Tyler, still filming, whispered, "He's going to lose it, isn't he?" Claire only nodded. For now, it was a stalemate. A room divided, fear and courage in equal measure, and the knowledge that something was about to break. But Blaze never moved from Ava's side, and Claire, for the first time in months, felt the old fire ignite. She would not let this story end in tragedy. Not for Ava, not for herself, not tonight. Outside, the sirens began to cut through the storm, distant but getting closer. Inside, everyone waited, hearts pounding, hoping for rescue, hoping for something to hold on to until morning. The storm battered the Blue Spoon Diner, its angry howls vibrating the windows and rattling the old neon sign. But inside, time seemed to slow, as if the world outside had faded to a dull roar, and only the people trapped within those four walls remained. Claire watched the snow swirling past the glass and felt the storm echo in her own chest. Cold, relentless, impossible to ignore. She moved to the booth across from Ava and Blaze. For a moment, she just watched the girl, her pale fingers twisting together, the line of worry in her brow, the way her eyes darted to Walter and then away. Blaze pressed himself even closer to Ava, his tail curled protectively around her, his big head resting on her knee. His presence was a silent promise. "I'm here. You're not alone." Claire tried to offer a smile, but it came out lopsided. She looked down at her hands, still trembling. Her fingertips brushed the dog tag in her pocket. She wished Mike were here. He always knew what to say when fear crept in. She wished she could tell him how heavy it was, carrying someone else's pain. "Did you know Blaze was a hero?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, meant for Ava alone. Ava glanced up, uncertain but curious. Claire steadied herself and told a story, not about herself, never about herself, but about Blaze in Afghanistan. She described the night Blaze sniffed out an IED under a dusty road, saving an entire convoy. She told how Blaze had sat beside wounded soldiers, never leaving, just pressing his weight against them until help arrived. "He never leaves anyone behind," Claire finished, her throat tight. "That's just who he is." Ava blinked, a single tear tracing down her cheek. She leaned forward and buried her face in Blaze's fur, whispering, "Thank you." Blaze licked her hand, eyes shining with something close to understanding. Across the diner, Walter started to pace, his agitation rising with every pass. He checked his phone again, muttered curses under his breath, tugged at the battered suitcase with a jerk that rattled the dishes. Every now and then, he shot a look at Claire, full of anger and desperation. Mrs. Ramirez moved quietly, offering coffee refills, gentle words, and calm that stretched farther than any police siren could. She kept glancing at the clock and the snow, her hands never quite still. Tyler, the young busboy, caught Claire's eye and gave her a thumbs up from behind the counter. He was still filming, trying in his own way to bear witness, to keep everyone safe. Claire noticed Ava shivering and slipped off her own scarf, handing it over. "It's warm," she said. "It helped me in some tough places." Ava clutched it like a lifeline, pulling it close. The hush inside grew deeper. For a long while no one spoke. It was just the wind, Blaze's steady breathing, and the low hum of the coffee machine. Claire's mind drifted. She thought of the last conversation she'd had with Mike before he died. How he'd told her, "Sometimes, all you can do is sit with someone in the dark until the morning comes." She remembered his laugh, the way he squeezed her shoulder before every patrol. The guilt gnawed at her. She hadn't saved him, not really. She wondered if she'd ever forgive herself. Ava's voice was so soft it was almost lost in the storm. "Are you scared?" she asked, not looking up. Claire hesitated. Then she said, "Yeah, I get scared a lot. But I've learned something. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're still fighting." Ava looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Will it ever go away? The scared part?" Claire shook her head. "Maybe not. But it gets quieter when you're not alone." Walter's voice crashed through the quiet, sharp and ugly. "Enough of this. Ava, get your stuff. We're leaving when this lets up." But Ava didn't move. Blaze stood up, a low growl building in his chest. Claire stood too, her posture shifting, something unbreakable settling in her eyes. Mrs. Ramirez approached, setting a mug of cocoa in front of Ava. "You stay right here, sweetheart. Nobody's leaving." Walter's face reddened, his hands clenching into fists. But something about the way the room shifted, the solidarity in Mrs. Ramirez's voice, the unwavering presence of Blaze and Claire, made him hesitate. In that pause, Ava did something brave. She reached for Blaze, pulled him close, and let herself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, but honest. Claire watched her, heart aching, but also swelling with pride. For the first time that night, Claire allowed herself to imagine a different ending. Maybe the storm would pass. Maybe Ava would be safe. Maybe, just maybe, Claire could let go of some of her own darkness. As the minutes crawled by, something shifted. The storm outside raged, but inside hope crept in, slow and fragile. Ava sipped her cocoa, Blaze resting his chin on her lap, and Claire felt the knot in her chest loosen, just a little. She glanced out at the storm, then back at the people around her, and realized, sometimes surviving the night was the bravest thing of all. The tension in the diner had become a living thing, thick, electric, crawling across every linoleum tile and bouncing between the battered booths. It was as if the storm outside had poured into the Blue Spoon and taken up residence, daring anyone to breathe too loud, to move too suddenly. Walter Briggs couldn't sit any longer. He stood, yanking his suitcase from under the table, the rubber wheels scraping across the floor. He reached for Ava's arm, his grip harder than before. The girl flinched, but Blaze immediately stepped between them, fur bristling, a warning rumble vibrating deep in his chest. Claire was on her feet in a flash, her military instincts crackling through every nerve. "Let her go," she said, voice steady but edged with steel. She was no longer just a stranger in a diner. She was a guardian, a wall between Walter and the terrified child. Walter sneered. "You don't know what's happening here. She's my niece and she's coming with me. None of you can stop me." His words, meant to be firm, quivered with uncertainty. He glanced at the storm-blurred windows, then at the back exit, measuring his options. Ava pressed herself behind Blaze, her fingers tangled in his fur, shoulders shaking. Blaze did not move. If Walter wanted to get to Ava, he'd have to go through 100 pounds of loyal, trained muscle. Mrs. Ramirez, from behind the counter, gripped her heavy skillet, knuckles white. "You're not going anywhere until the sheriff gets here," she called out, her voice surprisingly loud in the close air. Walter's eyes darted to the kitchen, to the camera in Tyler's trembling hand, to the faces watching him, each one silent, resolute. The blizzard outside had turned the diner into a cage. He was trapped, and he knew it. He shoved Claire, harder than he meant to, panic taking over. She stumbled back, but didn't fall. Blaze leapt, barking ferociously, blocking Walter's path with teeth bared and hackles raised. "Get that damn dog away from me!" Walter barked, but his voice cracked, the last thread of control snapping. Tyler caught it all on video. The violence, the fear, the standoff. He muttered to Claire, "It's streaming. People are seeing this." Walter's panic grew, sweat beading on his brow. He made a sudden lunge toward the back exit, dragging Ava with him. But Blaze darted to block the door, his body low, barking with all the force he could muster. Ava, sensing her chance, twisted away and ducked behind the counter with Mrs. Ramirez. Claire stepped between Walter and the rest of the diner, eyes locked on his. "You don't have to do this," she said, voice lower now, reaching for the compassion beneath her fear. "Let her go. It's over." But Walter was too far gone to listen. "You have no idea what's at stake," he spat, reaching into his coat for something. Claire tensed, fearing the worst, but it was only his phone, which he hurled at the wall in frustration, shattering it. Mrs. Ramirez's hand hovered near the emergency button under the register. Tyler, sensing the danger, called out, "The sheriff's here! I see lights!" He was bluffing, but it gave the room a split second of hope. Walter froze. Blaze, eyes never leaving Walter, barked again, louder, as if to remind everyone whose side he was on. In the sudden silence that followed, the sound of sirens finally pierced the howl of the wind. Real this time, cutting through fear like a blade. Walter's mask slipped. "It was never supposed to be like this," he muttered, sagging against the wall. He looked smaller, older, beaten by more than the storm. Claire exhaled, relief and adrenaline mixing in her veins. She glanced at Ava, now clinging to Blaze, her face hidden in the dog's fur. Mrs. Ramirez crouched beside them, murmuring quiet reassurances. Tyler lowered his phone, voice shaky. "They're almost here." Walter turned one last time, but Claire was already blocking his escape. Blaze at her side, Mrs. Ramirez and Ava safely shielded behind the counter. The snow outside churned on, but inside, the tide had shifted. A moment later, the front door shuddered under a heavy hand. The sheriff, bundled in a thick coat, gun holstered but visible. "Everyone stay put," he commanded, stepping into the heat and chaos. Walter tried to make a break for the back, but Blaze lunged, knocking him to the floor with a single powerful leap. Claire and the sheriff moved in together, subduing Walter as he struggled, his protests growing weaker. Ava cried out, reaching for Claire. The sheriff cuffed Walter, reading him his rights, while Mrs. Ramirez wrapped Ava in a wool blanket. Blaze remained glued to the girl's side, head pressed against her knee, as if to say, "You're safe now. I've got you." The diner, once a pressure cooker, now felt almost peaceful. The storm raged on outside, but inside something softer settled, a sense of survival, of justice narrowly won. Claire, breathing hard, felt her own hands tremble, but this time it wasn't from fear. She looked at Blaze, who met her gaze with quiet pride. Together, they had faced the darkness and found their way through. Chaos erupted the instant the sheriff's SUV headlights tore through the swirling blizzard, illuminating the snow-packed parking lot in ghostly blue. The wail of sirens, muffled by the storm, grew louder until it was right outside the Blue Spoon Diner. For a heartbeat, everyone inside froze. Walter's eyes darted wildly. Cornered animal, all nerves and desperation. Walter seized his last chance. Grabbing Ava roughly by the wrist, he hauled her toward the rear exit, dragging his battered suitcase behind. Chairs toppled, plates crashed. Ava struggled, panic turning her voice to a whimper. Blaze lunged forward in a blur of muscle and fury, his bark so fierce it made the windows rattle. Claire saw red. She vaulted the counter, landing between Walter and the exit, arms wide. "Let her go!" she shouted, her voice splitting the chaos. Walter snarled, yanking harder, but Ava dug in her heels, Blaze bracing himself between them. In that instant, time slowed, the snow shrieking against the walls. Mrs. Ramirez's gasp as she clutched a phone in trembling hands. Tyler's phone streaming every moment, the storm outside warring with the storm within. Walter tried to shove Claire aside, but she stood her ground. "It's over!" she barked, every inch the soldier she'd once been. But Walter wasn't listening. He yanked open the back door, letting a blast of icy wind swirl in. Ava screamed, "Let go of me!" Her voice, small and sharp, cut through everything. Blaze leaped, jaws snapping, pinning Walter's ankle with iron determination. Walter crashed to the ground, suitcase bursting open, scattering faded clothes and scattered papers. The sheriff and a deputy barreled in, weapons drawn but pointed down, faces grim. "Everyone freeze!" the sheriff commanded, voice a thunderclap. Walter, sprawled on the floor, tried to scramble up, but Blaze was relentless, pinning him until the officers closed in. The deputy snapped cuffs on Walter's wrists, reading him his rights as he spat curses, face contorted with rage and shame. Ava was sobbing now, shaking so hard she could barely speak. Claire knelt beside her, scooping her into a hug, Blaze licking the girl's hand, offering comfort the way only a dog could. The sheriff surveyed the room, overturned chairs, shattered plates, frightened faces. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, voice softer now. Claire nodded, eyes burning. "She's safe now," she said, glancing at Ava. Tyler, phone still filming, caught the sheriff's nod and the way Mrs. Ramirez slid to the floor, relief overtaking her. "It's all on video," Tyler whispered. "All of it." The deputy took the phone, promising to use the footage for evidence. Walter was led away, his head bowed. As the door slammed behind him, a gust of snow billowed in. Then silence settled. Just the storm's dying growl and the sound of people breathing again. Ava clung to Blaze, sobs quieting, face buried in his thick fur. Claire kept an arm around her, letting the warmth pass between them, trying to still her own shaking hands. Mrs. Ramirez busied herself gathering up fallen cups and plates. She poured hot cocoa for everyone, even the officers, her hands steadier now, her voice returning to its usual gentle warmth. The sheriff knelt by Ava, voice low and kind. "You did great, sweetheart. You're safe now. And you too, Blaze." The dog thumped his tail, never leaving Ava's side. Claire ruffled his ears, whispering, "Good boy. You saved her life tonight." The other customers in the diner, silent during the chaos, began to murmur, some even clapping softly for Blaze. Mrs. Ramirez knelt beside Ava, wrapping her in a blanket and stroking her hair. "You're family here now," she said. "You both are. Ava finally found her voice, small and raw. "Will you stay with me?" she whispered to Blaze. The dog nudged her, licking her cheek, then flopped beside her, head in her lap, protective as ever. Claire watched Ava's small hands tremble as she pulled out the dog tag, Mike's tag that Claire had dropped in the fray. She handed it back, eyes huge and grateful. "It kept me safe," Ava whispered. Claire managed to smile, tears welling up as she tucked the tag back into her pocket. Tyler's video, already uploaded, began to spread, first in the local news feed, then all over social media. Comments poured in. "That German Shepherd's a hero. Somebody get that girl a therapy dog. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Blaze." People in the city, trapped in their own homes by the storm, watched and sent messages of hope and support. Police escorted Walter out into the snow, but he no longer fought. He looked at Ava, something bitter in his eyes. Defeat, maybe regret. Ava couldn't look back. She only clung tighter to Blaze, letting his heartbeat steady her own. The sheriff turned to Claire, gratitude written across his weary face. "You did good, soldier," he said quietly. "You all did." For a while, the diner filled with warmth again. The crackle of the heater, the slow return of conversation, Ava's shy smile as Blaze licked cocoa from her fingers, Claire's soft laughter, something she thought she'd forgotten how to do. As the blizzard began to ease, dawn crept gray and gentle over Minneapolis. The city was battered, but inside the diner, survivors huddled close, bound together by fear, courage, and the stubborn love of a dog who refused to give up. Claire looked down at Ava, Blaze resting his head in the girl's lap, and felt something shift inside her. A thaw, a fragile hope that maybe after so much darkness, the morning really could come. Dawn crept pale and shy over Minneapolis, turning the snow from blue-black to a soft silver. The blizzard had surrendered to quiet drifts, the city emerging slow and tentative, as if it too was recovering from a sleepless, battered night. In the Blue Spoon Diner, the chaos faded into something softer, relief, exhaustion, and the raw beginnings of healing. The sheriff's deputies, their work mostly done, ushered Claire, Ava, and Blaze into the warmth of their squad car for a short, silent drive to the police station. Claire cradled Ava in the back seat. Blaze squeezed protectively between them, refusing to be separated for even a second. Outside, salt trucks plowed the streets, their yellow lights swirling in the early morning fog. At the station, everything felt sterile and strange. Hard benches, humming fluorescent lights, the distant clatter of keys and paperwork. But the officers moved gently, aware that what had happened in the diner was more than just a late-night call. It was a wound cut deep, needing care that couldn't be found in procedure alone. Ava clung to Blaze, fingers buried deep in his fur, eyes swollen and red, but refusing to let go. Even as a social worker tried to lead her away for questioning, Ava only allowed it if Blaze came too. Claire followed them, exhaustion in her bones, feeling the ache of her own bruises but pushing through for the sake of the girl. They found a small interview room, warm but bare, where Ava's mother, Dana, was already waiting. Her face streaked with tears, hands twisting a tissue to shreds. Dana leaped to her feet when Ava entered, enveloping her daughter in a trembling hug. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking with guilt and relief. But Ava's grip on Blaze did not loosen, and it was only with the German Shepherd pressed between them that mother and daughter were finally able to hold each other. Dana knelt on the floor, arms around both child and dog, whispering her thanks to Blaze and Claire again and again. Claire watched, standing back, the dog tag heavy in her hand. She felt like a shadow, both part of this moment and not, a bystander at her own rescue. The urge to slip away, to fade into the background, was strong. But Blaze stayed close, pressing his nose against her leg, grounding her. The sheriff entered, his manner gentler now that the crisis had passed. "You saved her life," he told Claire quietly. "And you gave her mom back her daughter. That's not something most people can say." Claire looked away, brushing a tear she hadn't meant to shed. "Blaze did the real work," she managed. "He always does." Ava, seeing the exchange, reached up and pressed the dog tag into Claire's palm. "Keep it," she whispered, her voice stronger than before. "For luck." Time passed in slow, careful minutes. The deputies completed paperwork. The social worker brought hot chocolate. Dana called her sister to share the news. The officers let Blaze wander the station, tail wagging, winning hearts, as he nudged his head under hands and rested beside every frightened child. Meanwhile, Tyler's video, blurry but raw, capturing the chaos, the confrontation, and Blaze's heroics, spread quickly. It appeared on news feeds and social media, sparking comments and calls to action. This is what courage looks like. Therapy dogs save lives. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Blaze. Later, Ava was examined by the station nurse and then cleared to go home. But she hesitated, clinging to Blaze's collar, her eyes searching for Claire. "Can I visit Blaze?" she asked, barely above a whisper. It was the first time she'd spoken in front of anyone but Claire all night. Claire knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. "You can see him any time you want," she promised. "He's your friend now, too." Ava gave her the smallest of smiles, a real one, fragile and bright. The sheriff returned, paperwork in hand. "You're free to go," he said, addressing Claire. "But you're also a hero. If you ever need anything, this city owes you." Claire only nodded. For the first time in what felt like years, her smile came easily. When they stepped outside, the city was transformed. Snow glittered on tree branches, sunlight melting it into diamonds. News vans lined the street, but Claire and Blaze slipped quietly away, refusing interviews, needing only each other and the fresh hope that waited in the stillness. That night, as the world buzzed with news of heroism, Ava slept at home. Blaze's old army scarf wrapped around her shoulders, and Claire lay awake, listening to the dog's gentle breathing beside her bed. She thought of Mike, his voice, his courage, and realized something had shifted deep within her. The wound was still there, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filling, slow and steady, with connection and hope. The next morning, Ava and her mom visited Claire's small apartment, bringing donuts and shy smiles. Ava and Blaze played in the tiny patch of sunlight by the window, red candies and laughter scattered on the rug. Claire and Dana drank coffee, talking quietly, about fear, about loss, about what it meant to save someone and to let yourself be saved. And when Ava finally spoke, her voice clear and certain, she asked the question that tied the long night together. "Can we go to the park with Blaze today?" Claire looked at Blaze, his tail wagging, and felt a weight lift. "Yeah, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of promise. "We can go anywhere you want." Inside, both wounded and healing, they began to build something new, something gentle and true. The scars would remain, but so would the love that stitched them together. Spring came to Minneapolis slowly, creeping in through slush and stubborn patches of snow, but change was in the air. Weeks had passed since that long, harrowing night in the diner. The world had moved on in some ways, but for Claire, Ava, and Blaze, life carried a new undercurrent. A promise to stand up, to show up, to see and be seen. The courthouse was a far cry from the warmth of the Blue Spoon. Tall, pale walls, the echo of footsteps on marble, pews filled with strangers, every face a story of pain or hope. Claire sat with Ava and Dana on a hard wooden bench. Blaze stretched at their feet, his therapy dog vest bright blue and unmistakable. Reporters milled near the back, their cameras flashing, but all Claire saw was Ava, hands folded tight, jaw set with a courage far older than her years. Walter Briggs was led in by 2 deputies, hands cuffed, eyes rimmed with exhaustion and defeat. He looked at no one. For the first time, Claire wondered about his own scars, the ones that warped love into something twisted and desperate. But compassion couldn't excuse what he'd done. The prosecutor was a woman in a gray suit, her voice strong as she addressed the court. Your Honor, what happened in the Blue Spoon Diner was not a misunderstanding, but a desperate act that could have ended in tragedy. If not for the quick thinking of bystanders and the actions of a trained German shepherd, this little girl might not be here today. She played Tyler's video on a monitor, the grainy footage flickering. Walter's rage, Claire's intervention, Blaze lunging, Ava's quiet bravery. The whole courtroom leaned forward, gripped by the reality of what they were seeing. As the video ended, a ripple went through the room. Not shock, but awe at the force of ordinary people standing up for what's right. Ava was called to the stand. She squeezed Blaze's collar as they walked forward together, the dog moving with slow, calm certainty. Ava's knees shook, but she held her head high. Do you swear to tell the truth? The bailiff asked. She nodded, voice soft but clear. I do. The prosecutor knelt beside her. Ava, do you remember the night in the diner? Ava glanced at Blaze, who rested his chin on her knee. Yes, ma'am. Can you tell us what happened? A hush fell. Ava's hands twisted, but she didn't look at Walter. I was scared. I made the SOS sign. No one ever noticed before, but Claire did. Blaze came to me and he didn't leave. Not once. She swallowed, her small voice unwavering. When Walter tried to take me, Blaze stopped him. I wasn't alone anymore. Blaze stayed pressed against her leg, an anchor. Every time her voice wavered, she reached for him, and he steadied her. The defense tried to cast doubt, but even their questions seemed to shrink in the warmth of Ava's bravery and Blaze's silent, loyal presence. Dana wept quietly in the back. Claire closed her eyes, sending every ounce of strength she had across the room. When Claire was called, she stood tall, her uniform replaced by jeans and a simple sweater, but her bearing unmistakable. She spoke honestly, letting her voice tremble when it had to, describing the pain of watching suffering go unnoticed, of nearly giving up before Blaze pulled her back. She told the court about Mike, about Afghanistan, about the way hope and fear walk hand in hand. I saw the SOS because I know what it's like to need help, she said. I recognized it because I've needed saving too. Sometimes it takes a stranger, and sometimes it takes a dog. The judge, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, listened without interruption. When the closing arguments ended, he cleared his throat. This case is not just about one desperate night, but about the ways we look after each other. The video evidence, the testimony, and the courage displayed here compel this court to act. He denied bail for Walter Briggs, commending Claire, Blaze, and the entire diner staff for their vigilance and bravery. This court recommends Blaze for the city's Service Animal Award, he added, glancing at the dog sprawled out, tail thumping on the floor. A cheer went up, soft and hesitant, as if the courtroom itself had let out a breath it didn't know it was holding. Afterward, outside in the weak sunlight, Ava hugged Blaze tight. "You're my hero," she whispered, and Blaze licked the salt from her cheek. Reporters crowded in, asking for comments, but Claire kept her answer simple. "Pay attention to the quiet signs. That's how we save each other." Tyler's video, now millions of views deep, had inspired a movement. Schools started teaching SOS signals, and community centers held workshops about noticing, about stepping in when someone is in trouble. Claire was invited to speak, but she always brought Blaze, letting the dog's quiet presence speak for them both. Ava, once so small and scared, grew bolder. She spoke up in class, made new friends, and even helped train other therapy dogs at the Bright Horizons Center, always repeating the ritual: slide a red candy to a dog, and you're never alone. As the courthouse emptied, Dana squeezed Claire's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for seeing her, for being brave enough to step in." Claire shook her head. "I wasn't alone either," she replied, looking down at Blaze. "None of us are, not really." And for the first time in years, Claire felt the heavy ache in her chest ease. Justice wasn't just the end of danger. It was the beginning of something new, a kind of hope that could survive even the longest winter. The spring sun angled softly through the wide windows of Bright Horizons Center, a place that didn't look like much from the outside. Just an old brick community building wedged between a playground and a city garden. But inside, light danced across the wood floors, the rooms warm with laughter, quiet voices, and the soft padding of paws. This was where the wounded, children, parents, soldiers, strays, came to find their way back to themselves. Claire sat with Ava on a long wooden bench beneath a line of sunbeams. Blaze sprawled at their feet, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow and deep. There was something about the peace in the room, something that felt earned, not given. Both Claire and Ava bore invisible scars, but here, those scars were part of the story, not the ending. For the first time in months, Claire was learning to sit still without her heart galloping from shadow to shadow. She'd started coming to Bright Horizons as a volunteer, drawn by the memory of her own loneliness and the knowledge of what it meant to be noticed, to be invited in. She watched Ava, who now moved through the center with a quiet assurance, her fear replaced by something steadier, an inner strength, delicate but real. That morning, Ava had led a new group of children, refugees from difficult homes, shy and silent, through Blaze's red candy ritual. She knelt on the floor, sliding a red candy toward the dog, then waited as each child tried in turn. The message was simple. If you need help, if you want comfort, if you want to be seen, you can ask. Blaze licked each little hand, tail thumping, giving his wordless promise. Claire watched the scene, feeling a deep, complicated pride. There were moments, even now, when her mind pulled her back to the bridge, to the howling Minneapolis winter, to the weight of the dog tag in her fist and the impossible gravity of despair. But every time it was Blaze, his nudges, his bark, his refusal to let her slip away, who brought her back to the present. She looked at Ava, sitting beside her, small shoulders relaxed, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're pretty brave, you know," Claire said, her voice low. "Not just for what you did in the diner, but for this." She nodded at the kids. You're helping them the way Blaze helped us. Ava blushed, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I was scared at first, but Blaze makes it easier. He always knows when someone needs him. Claire nodded. Me too. A long silence fell, but it was a good one. The kind where hearts settle and wounds close just a little. Later, after the children left, Ava leaned against Claire, her words careful. Do you ever feel like you'll never be okay again? She asked. Claire considered. Sometimes, but it gets better when you let people in. Or dogs. She ruffled Blaze's ears, the dog's tail giving a slow sweep. Ava studied her, searching for truth. Why did you come back for me? You could have walked away. Claire's answer was quiet, honest. Because I saw your signal, and I remembered how it felt when no one saw mine. And because Blaze wouldn't let me give up. Not on myself, not on you. Sometimes we don't get to choose who we save. We just notice and we act. Ava rested her head on Claire's shoulder, comforted by the admission. The weeks after the trial had sparked something bigger than either of them could have imagined. The viral video of the diner rescue grew into a citywide Notice the Signs campaign. Posters went up in schools, coffee shops, and bus stations. Children learned the silent SOS, parents and teachers trained to spot the small signals. A clenched fist, a shaking hand, averted eyes. Mrs. Ramirez from the diner became a minor celebrity, giving interviews about community vigilance and the need to care louder. For Claire, it was strange to be thanked for noticing, stranger still that her own wounds, so long a source of shame, had become a bridge to others. She began leading workshops at Bright Horizons, teaching parents, teachers, and kids how to read the quiet language of pain and hope. The most powerful moments, though, happened when Blaze lay beside a frightened child, or when Ava knelt to show another how to slide a red candy, passing along a ritual that turned fear into courage. Claire saw it again and again. Trust wasn't rebuilt with grand gestures, but with tiny ones. A shared snack, a knowing glance, a hand held out in the dark. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days the weight returned, but those days grew fewer as time went on, and the space between the storms grew wide enough for hope to take root. One afternoon, as sunlight slanted across the bench, Claire confided in Ava. You know, there was a night I almost didn't make it through. I stood on a bridge and thought maybe I was done fighting. She hesitated, her voice catching. But Blaze, he wouldn't let me go, just like you didn't let go. Ava squeezed her hand. I'm glad you stayed. So am I, Claire whispered. She looked down at Blaze, who nuzzled her palm as if agreeing. As the day faded and families filtered out of Bright Horizons, Claire and Ava stayed behind, sharing snacks and stories in the quiet. Outside, the city went about its business, but in that sunlit room, wounds were healing, one small act at a time. Sometimes the world is changed not by what we say or do in the moment of crisis, but by what we choose to notice, and by what we do afterward, when no one is watching but those who need us most. Minnehaha Park on a bright Saturday. Sunlight pouring through green leaves, the sound of children's laughter rising with the wind, families scattered across picnic tables and checkered blankets. Minneapolis was finally awake to spring, the city's long winter now a memory melting into grass and wildflowers. Claire stood at the edge of a bustling playground, hands in her jacket pockets, gaze soft and steady as she watched Ava, her face open, her hair wild, led a group of kids in a game of tag beneath the blossoming trees. Blaze lay in the shade of a picnic table, his eyes half closed but alert, soaking in the gentle chaos. Every so often, a child would wander over and run their fingers through his fur, or press a red candy into his paw, giggling at the ritual that had become legend in their neighborhood. The adults nearby, some who had only known Claire in passing, now nodded to her with a mixture of gratitude and awe. In the eyes of this community, she and Blaze had become something more than survivors. They were the promise that healing was possible. The weeks since the trial had not been free of pain or setbacks. Nightmares still crept in at the edges, for both Claire and Ava, and the city's news cycle had already spun on to the next tragedy, the next fire, the next hero. But here, among ordinary people, hope endured, not in grand gestures, but in quiet, daily acts of kindness and connection. As the sun climbed higher, Ava's mother, Dana, set up a picnic spread and invited everyone to share. "You know," she said, handing Claire a plate, "I used to think you had to be strong to survive something like this. But watching Ava, watching you, I think it's the small things that matter. The noticing, the not walking away." Claire nodded, a smile ghosting her lips. "We all miss things sometimes. I know I have, but Blaze..." She looked at her dog, who now stood, tail wagging as he was swarmed by children. "He never does. He always knows when someone needs him. He teaches us how to listen, really listen." Dana squeezed her hand. "I'm just grateful you were there, and that you stayed." Not far away, a group of parents gathered, quietly discussing the Notice the Signs program that now operated in their schools and community centers. Kids practiced the silent SOS on the playground, just as Ava had shown them, and several therapy dogs, trained by Claire and Blaze, sat by the picnic tables, eyes shining, waiting for the signal to offer comfort. Claire glanced at Ava, who had stopped mid-game to help a smaller child who'd scraped her knee. Ava gently guided her to Blaze, who nudged the child's hand with his nose, tail thumping softly. The child smiled, wiped away her tears, and the game resumed. It was a tiny moment, one of 100 that afternoon, but it mattered. It was everything. Later, as the sun dipped low and families packed up, Claire found herself sitting on the grass with Ava, Dana, and Blaze. The air was cool, fragrant with cut grass and barbecue smoke. Ava leaned against Claire, eyes thoughtful. "Do you think I'll ever forget what happened?" she asked quietly. Claire brushed a strand of hair from Ava's face. "You might not forget, but it won't always hurt the same way. You're stronger now. Every day you help someone else, it gets a little easier. Healing takes time, but you're not alone." Ava nodded, silent for a while. Then, looking at Blaze, she smiled. "He's my best friend. He saved me." "He saved me too," Claire admitted. "More times than I can count." Blaze nudged her hand, sensing her mood. Claire scratched behind his ears, and for the first time in years, she felt light, anchored not by fear or loss, but by gratitude. Across the lawn, families called goodbyes, waving at Blaze, who had become a kind of legend in their neighborhood. Kids promised to visit the therapy dog center. Parents traded stories of small kindnesses and signals they'd learned to notice. Ava's laughter rang out as she ran to join her friends. Every trace of the frightened, silent girl from that night in the diner replaced by confidence and joy. Dana watched her go, tears bright in her eyes, but her smile unbroken. She turned to Claire. "You gave her back to me," she whispered. "How do I ever thank you for that?" Claire shook her head. "You don't have to. We all do what we can, when we can. It's what Blaze taught me. Sometimes hope comes on 4 legs." As the sky turned pink and the city glowed with evening light, Claire looked around at the gathering and felt the weight of the story's meaning settle in her heart. Healing is slow. It's messy and uneven, and so often invisible to those outside it. But it is real. It happens not just because of one moment of courage, but because of the persistence to show up again and again, for yourself, for others, for the community you're part of. Sometimes the smallest signals, an SOS in a diner, a hand held out, a dog's quiet presence, can save a life. Sometimes the loudest heroes are the ones who listen. The story wasn't about one act of heroism, but about the enduring, ordinary work of healing, of noticing, of daring to care. It was about Blaze, the dog who refused to let despair win. It was about Ava, who found her voice. It was about Claire, who learned to trust again. As the sun vanished and the city lights twinkled on, Ava ran back, arms open wide, and hugged Claire and Blaze together. For the first time, Claire didn't feel haunted. She felt home. She looked at her little chosen family, at the kids practicing signals nearby, at the ripple of kindness spreading out from this one park into the city beyond, and knew, really knew, that in a world full of noise and haste, it's the quietest voices, the simplest acts, that change everything. In the end, kindness is never wasted. Healing takes a community. Listen, notice, act, and remember. Sometimes hope comes on 4 legs.